Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Tarantino, the author of Dying to See, Revelations about God, Jesus, our pathways, and the nature of the soul. And welcome to my YouTube channel called Exploring Everything Spiritual. Please click the like button below and feel free to share any of my videos on this channel. And don't forget to subscribe below to see future amazing videos about everything spiritual. Today's guest is Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who's had many spiritual encounters and a shared death experience as well. Welcome to my show today.
Oh,
Jeff.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be with you.
Great. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeff, though. During his 25 years as an emergency physician, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll saw souls leave their bodies at death and communicated with them. His experiences began as a child in his childhood after his brother died in a farm accident. After decades of silence, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll published his award-winning memoir, Not Yet. As an international speaker and an intuitive mentor, he connects souls to their highest self and their most authentic life path. Great. Listen, should we start back at your childhood?
Yes, we can start anywhere you want. Childhood's a good place to start, I suppose.
Yeah, since that's where it started.
You know, I had these profound experiences in the emergency department and I never spoke about them for years. And then when people started asking me about, well, when did this start for you? How did this happen? That was the first time I really contemplated the question myself. And it started me on a path of thinking and remembering, and I went back into my childhood. And I think it all started when I was just a month before my 12th birthday. My older brother died in a farm accident when he tipped a tractor over. And it kind of rocked my world. I didn't think it had that big of an impact on me. And then 20 years later, he came to me and he said, "You have to go talk with our mother. There's things she's never told you about my death." And that got my attention. I went and I sat down with my mother. She and my father are still alive. They still live in the same house where I grew up, where my brother and I were living when he passed. And just she and I that day were visiting, and that was the very first time she ever told me, "Before Stan died, I always knew where you were in the house because I could hear you singing. After your brother died, you stopped singing." And that was the first realization I had that his death had had a big impact on me. But it must have changed me in a fundamental sort of way, because I started having experiences while I was a teenager. I'd get messages from people. In fact, when I was 16, I was driving a Volkswagen Bug, much too fast on a narrow, windy country road after dark. And I had two friends in the car. None of us were wearing seatbelts. And a voice spoke to me and said, "You have to slow down." I was in a really rebellious part of my life at that time. I wouldn't have listened to any authority figure. I joked that if God had been sitting in the seat next to me, I wouldn't have listened to him. But I listened to this voice because it just wrapped itself around my soul. And I felt it. And I slowed down. I went around the corner. We hit a Cadillac head on. And there was a lot of damage, but nobody was injured. I think if I hadn't have heard the voice that night, I might have died. And it took me a long time to realize that the voice was my brother. It was the only voice I would have listened to. I always listened to my older brother, even when I wouldn't listen to my parents or anybody else. And then as time went on, I started to sometimes see the messengers that were delivering the message. And so by the time I got to the emergency department, and I was having these profound experiences when people would pass in the emergency department, it felt natural and normal to me, if you can imagine. It felt just like part of what happens and who I was. And I assumed other people had similar experiences, but didn't talk about them either. So that's kind of how I think it all started for me.
Interesting. So did you think, did you have any kind of after effects? I mean, you were saved there. And did that change your outlook?
No, I was too young and naive. I something like that as being any kind of an intervention on my behalf. I just, I kept doing all the things I shouldn't have been doing. I was drinking and smoking. At that time, I was riding bulls and rodeos. And my dream in life was to grow up and be a professional bull rider. One of the things I swore I'd never do was go to college. And then I made one wrong turn and ended up in medical school of all the places I ended up being a doctor.
Well, that's great. How did it evolve after that? Your experiences?
Well,
did it not start till you were in the emergency room then, or?
No, I was having spiritual experiences from the time I was a teenager. In fact, I don't remember all of those experiences, and I didn't start keeping a journal until I was a teenager. When I was 19 is when I started keeping a daily journal, which I've now had going for 40 years. But I remember when I was 19, I'd had enough experiences by then that I actually approached somebody that was a few years older than me, and she was very experienced. I trusted her a lot, and I asked her one day, in the only language that was available to me as a teenager growing up in a Christian home, I said, "Does God ever speak to you in sentences?" And I didn't give her any context for my question at all, just out of the blue. And she didn't even hesitate. She didn't phase her one bit. She looked at me and she kind of pointed her finger at me and she said, "Don't ever doubt that." That was all she said. And it proved to be good advice. And so as time went on, I'd get more messages and clearer messages, and I started carrying a notebook in my pocket, and I would write down impressions I got and things that I had questions about. And then when I got centered or prayerful or meditated or whatever I did to get connected, sometimes I would get answers to those questions, and I'd pull out my notebook and write them down. And that notebook really helped me in my communication as well.
Good. I know when I had problems at work, I would go home and they say sleep on it. But every time I did, I went to bed with a problem. The next morning I had the answer. And that's because my spirit helped solve that problem at night in my dream time, because my ego was asleep, I guess you say.
Yeah, that might be, maybe that's why that works that way. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. And so you had some experiences in the ER as well. You actually talk about your darkest hour. I said, in my darkest hour, sometimes very dark, my guides continue to teach me. What is that all about?
Yeah, that's kind of a long story, but let me try and make it as short as I can. I was in a public place one day, and this woman that was about my age came up to me and started the "I know you from someplace" conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And after a few minutes, we figured out I'd taken care of her husband years before in the emergency department when he got hypothermic riding his mountain bike on a cold, wet day. And in our conversation, I learned that her husband, the one I'd taken care of, had just died in a car crash. And this was just weeks after she'd given birth to their 6th child. And I was impressed with the depth of the sorrow and grief that she was experiencing. It was more profound than most people I'd encountered, because she had such a wonderful relationship with her husband. And I stewed on this for a period of months. And one night, I was on the way home from the emergency department about midnight, and Spirit spoke to me. And in my book, I call this woman Rebecca. And Spirit spoke to me and said, "Is Rebecca's family less important in my eyes than yours?" And I thought, no, of course not. And then the voice said, "Then why should they be in yours?" And I said, whoa, wait a minute. We're talking about my wife and kids. They have to be my first priority, right? But even as I'm saying it, I got this download, and I understood that the voice that was speaking to me loved all souls equally, and that I should too. And so without even thinking about the consequences of it, I just said, "Can I take some of Rebecca's spiritual burden and carry it for her for a while?" And to sorrowful grief that was part of her life settled onto mine. And it went on for a few years. One day it was so heavy, so foreboding. I had to sit down on the bed. I was at home. I had to sit down because I thought I was going to fall. And it closed in on me until I literally thought that I might die. Mind you, I'm a physician. I thought I was going to die. And then the voice spoke to me and said, "This is the way Rebecca felt the day her husband died." And I was given this experience vicariously. Sometime after that, I was in prayer and I asked, can I be free from this? This is so heavy. It's so much. It weighted me down so much. And when I prayed and asked about being delivered, the answer I got was not yet. That's where the title of my book comes from.
That's the title of the book. Yeah, I remember that portion in your book. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just felt so hopeless. It was so demoralizing. And 6 months or a year later, I said the same prayer again, and I asked, "Can I be free from this?" And I was shown the path. I could see a spiritual light, and I knew the steps to take to extricate myself from it, and I was given permission to go. And then the voice said, "But if you want the greater blessing, endure it for now." And that was the day hope came back. Because as horrible and heavy and difficult as it was, I understood, oh, there's a divine presence that loves me more than I love myself, that has a plan for me, that there's purpose in this heavy, horrible experience I'm going through. And I thought, well, if heaven's aware of me and there's purpose in this, then I can endure it for a bit longer, which I did. And that's the darkness I talk about in my book that taught me so much about
that definitely would. That definitely would make you experience somebody else's loss like that. So did that ease her? That did ease her burden, though, right? Did she? Well, or were you just feeling what she felt?
I hope it eased her burden. Of course, we don't have in the medical, from a medical perspective, we don't have a control subject to know.
Yeah.
We don't. So I hope it helped her. It helped me. I was just coming out of that horrible, heavy, dark period when I met somebody named Jeff Olson, who was going through a horrible, difficult trial in his life. And when we talked about his experiences, I remember coming home and writing in my journal for the very first time that night that I was grateful for my years in the darkness because I knew the answers to his questions and I knew how to help them.
Fabulous. And that created a strong friendship all these years.
Yes, Jeff Olson and I have been friends for 24 years. What happened was he was involved in a serious car crash. He doesn't know for sure, but he thinks he fell asleep. And the car rolled over, and his wife of 10 years, Tamara, and his 14-month-old son, Griffin, died instantly in the crash. And Jeff was taken to a local hospital and then flown to the trauma center where I was on duty. When I went into the trauma room, he was unconscious on the gurney and all the other providers were taking care of him, and standing above him in the air was his deceased wife, Tamara. And I saw her and she communicated with me, and I had that profound experience with her. And about a month later, after several surgeries and the amputation of his leg, Jeff Olson and I had a conversation, and I divulged to him what had happened that night, and he started to weep. And that's when he told me that before his body was even extricated from the vehicle, he'd risen up above the scene of the accident and met his wife. And she said, "You have to go back and raise our other son," because 7-year-old Spencer was in the back seat uninjured. So that was 24 years ago, and Jeff Olson and I are still very close friends today.
Oh, great. And you see spirits leave their body, spirits leaving their body as well, right?
Yes, I came to work one day, and as I was logging onto the computer to start my shift, I became aware of a spiritual presence over my shoulder. And I'd had enough experiences by then. Intuitively, I knew who it was. It was the woman whose body was around the corner in the room, and a team of providers were trying to resuscitate her. She was intubated, and they were actually doing chest compressions, trying to bring her back to life. And she came and tapped me on the shoulder and asked me So I stopped what I was doing. I went around the corner. Nobody paid any attention to me because I was coming on shift. I was in my work clothes and I just was a normal person there. So they just kept doing everything they were doing. She was unconscious. I walked over and gently rested my hand on her leg just because I'd learned that touch is so important. And as I touched her, she asked me if she could leave. Silently, mind you, she's intubated, she's unconscious. And initially I wondered, why would you ask me? And then I was given this download of these words, and I communicated silently back to her that if she felt it was the right time for her to go and she felt that that was the right thing for her to do, it was probably okay. And as I communicated that, she rose up out of her body and she stood in the air above the gurney. She had this glorious appearance, and she looked about half the age of the body she'd just come out of. She was so serenely happy, and she thanked me, and then she left. And I walked out of the room. As I was leaving, I heard the physician running the resuscitation pronounce her death in military time. And I thought, yeah, I know, I saw her leave. And I went over and logged on onto my computer, and that's how my shift started that day.
Well, and did she look like a person, huh? Or was she translucent? Was she blue, white?
When I have these experiences, they have a form that resembles their physical appearance, but they're more glorious and beautiful. And yes, they seem white, but more than white, they seem full of light and glory. And like when I saw Tamra, for example, it wasn't that I could see through her. She wasn't translucent like you see depicted in a film, but I could see what was beyond her, as if she wasn't there, even while I'm looking at her. And I know it doesn't make any sense, but that was how it was. And when I went over and I looked down at Jeff's leg, I was looking down at his badly injured leg, and I could still see Tamra standing in the air behind me because I could see in all directions at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, when I've seen souls outside their body, they still have the physical form of their body, but they usually appear in their prime of their physical existence. You know, if they're old, they come and they appear young, and they're always happy and they're always grateful.
That reminds me of my mom and dad. I took care of them the last 5 years of their life. And Dad's death was imminent. And I happened to be filming him at the time. And I did catch his spirit leaving his body, which is on my YouTube channel. And it's a blue energy that left his body. And it changes directions when you slow it down. It's quite interesting because it whips out so fast it seems to go to the right, but then when you slow it down, it goes to the left toward my mom because she was dying in the other bed. They were dying at the same time. And 9 days later, was actually 2 days after Dad passed, Mom was saying something. I said, "What'd you say, Mom?" She said, "I'm singing to the song." I said, "What song?" She said, "Good night, sweetheart." My dad always used to come into the room and he'd sing songs to her in a few frames of songs. And so I said, "That's got to be Dad. You know, it's good night, sweetheart. It was time for me to go." She said, "Yeah, I think it was." And then the day before she died, before she went unresponsive, she said, "Dick." I said, "You see Dad?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "What does he look like?" She said, "He looks so sharp." She had a big smile on her face. It was actually, we had a good time. Even though she was dying, we had a good time. So
Yeah, I've had some of my most profoundly spiritual experiences when somebody is passing away. And I think it's because if you use the metaphor of a veil as the separation between this life and the next, death is a time when that veil's drawn back. And I think if you're in proximity, some of that glory and light from the other side gets to splash onto you, and you can experience together with them for a while. And so one of the unfortunate things about parting temporarily with our loved ones when they pass is that sometimes we can be so overwhelmed with grief, we miss the spiritual nature miss the assuring, wonderful, glorious spiritual experience death is, because we're kind of overwrought with grief, and that's understandable. But if we can keep that in mind, sometimes we can have really profound spiritual experiences, even when we know we're going to be separated for a time.
Yeah, especially if you don't discount what they're saying to you, because I had asked them to share with me everything they saw, sensed, felt, experienced in any way during that 5 years, which they did. So I have a lot of notes, and that'll be in my next book. But if you don't discount, they'll tell you a lot more. And there was one, before Mom passed, she was kind of laying in her bed, and she was known for talking in her sleep, but you can't tell when she's asleep. But anyway, she was saying after Dad died, she obviously was taking a walk into heaven, because she was telling somebody, this is the same path that Dick took. And so she must have done a trial run up there and then came back to her body. And this was like a day or two before she passed. And I was wondering who, I didn't want to interrupt it because she was enjoying it. I would have liked to have known who was taking her, because Jesus was the first one that greeted me when I had my third near-death experience. So it very well could have been Jesus there. And makes sense that Dad would come back at the last minute, because he had all their life, they had said, we'll walk into heaven together, hand in hand. So I'm sure he came back to take her hand. But if you open up to all these things that they tell you, it's quite an experience. So yeah.
Yeah, people say some amazing things when they're approaching death. There's a phenomenon, medically it's described as terminal lucidity. And as the name implies, it happens when somebody's terminal and they're approaching death, and then they have a lucid period. And sometimes these are people that have had advanced dementia or some other kind of illness where they haven't spoken or been alert or communicative for long periods of time. And then they wake up and they speak as though they're perfectly there, perfectly lucid and alert and oriented. And then shortly after that, they pass. It's called terminal lucidity.
Terminal lucidity. My dad had, I don't know if it was really dementia. He was never diagnosed with it. But there were moments, and not often, but there were moments he didn't recognize his house and wanted to go home. And we would sit at the table one night, and he looked at Mom and he said, Mother, when are we going to go home? And she said, we are home. And he kept repeating it during the night. There was one night he got up and went into the kitchen and got a grocery sack. And he said, Norma, we're going to pack. They're coming to get us. So, and I know that is the home they were looking for was actually in heaven. And at that particular night, I said, what does it look like, Dad? I said, look at the fireplace. What does it look like? And he said, it's really hard to explain. And I said, does it look like you're looking in from another dimension? And he said, yeah, that's what it looks like. So I think some of that dementia is their spirit working out of their body, and they're having a different view of the world at that moment. What do you think about that?
I think that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
It's increasingly becoming accepted among many scholars that study this field that consciousness, or the human spirit or soul, the essence of what we are, is not created by the brain. In fact, it suggests there's some research that suggests that consciousness exists in spite of the brain, not because of it. And that in fact, the brain acts as a filter to allow us as a multidimensional being to exist in this physical form, in this dimension, without being continually and unmanageably distracted by being aware of all the other things that are going on. The brain filters that out for us.
Now, you've had out-of-body experiences yourself, and your consciousness stayed with your spirit when you were out of body, correct?
Yes, when I've had experiences that I felt like I was out of my body, my consciousness, that was the essence of who I was. I remembered things clearly, more clearly than when I'm in the physical form. I felt like I had a profound flow of knowledge. occasion, a life review. So all of these things that we hear people describe, I've experienced most of those things. And yes, the spirit, the soul, the consciousness exists beyond and independent of the physical form.
And you also had an experience I enjoyed reading about and hearing about in other videos where you were taking care of a homeless man. Would you like to share that story? That's pretty profound.
On this occasion, I walked into a room in the emergency department. A patient was sitting on the gurney. He was a homeless gentleman who I think he was probably in his mid 40s, although he looked 10 years older. I don't remember his exact age. He was wearing tattered clothes that were kind of soiled and worn out. He had long, scruffy hair and a big unkempt beard. He struggled with addictions, and he had holes in his shoes and holes in his socks, and he'd been out walking around in the snow, which is really, really bad for your feet. So I knew what needed to be done. He knew what needed to be done. I filled a wash basin with warm water, squirted some soap in it, and I grabbed a wash rag and sat down at the foot of the gurney. I took off his shoes and the last threads of his socks, and I proceeded to wash his feet. And in the process of doing that, everything that was temporal or physical or mortal was drawn back. And I saw who he was. I saw his soul. And I understood that I was in the presence of God. And some people would think that sounds blasphemous, but this is the experience I had. And I'd gone into the room thinking I was there to serve this man. And then I realized that he was there ministering to me. And he was the antithesis of everything the world defines as success. And yet I understood I was in the presence of the divine. He was there teaching me who I was, because that's who we all are. And I came to understand, I viewed every soul differently since that very day, because we're always next to God, whether we're sitting in church or in the gutter. That's who the soul next to us is. That's who we are. And I'll always be grateful for that gentleman that taught me that divine being who taught me that. If he did nothing else with his entire life, what he taught me made him a profound success, in my opinion.
Yes, yes. And in my experience, when I saw my spirit leave my body, because I was my consciousness and my spirit that left the upper part of my body, and then I watched my lower half, my spirit leave the body from the lower half, and then it drew up toward me. And I knew that was my sliver of God's Holy Spirit. And that's why God is always says that he is always with us, because he is with us through his Holy Spirit. He experiences life with us. He lives with us. So that's why he said in the Bible that what you do to the least of men, you do to me, because we both have a sliver of God's Holy Spirit in us. I think that's pretty profound to have realized that. You realized it in your way, and I realized it in my way.
Yes, and the thing that you have to remember is that these experiences always defy description in a meaningful, complete way. It's not that people don't have a sufficient command of the English language, it's that the words don't exist. And not just English, but any language. The words just don't exist. And so I used to think that word ineffable was kind of a cliche, but it's not. There are some things that cannot be expressed in the language that humans have at their command.
This is true. Near-death experiences like yours, you just simply, you search for those words, because you can't really explain the depth of it. It's the depth of it.
Yeah, you search for words and you use metaphors and similes and try to make comparisons to try and help people understand. And often it's just an exercise in frustration to try and help somebody understand your experience.
Now, you always say that you exist to help souls heal. And how do you do that now?
Interestingly enough, I never thought of myself as a healer when I was a physician in the ER. I was there helping people. I just thought I was just doing my job. It never occurred to me to think of myself as a healer per se. But now, instead of helping people with their physical bodies, I try to help them with their souls. When I finally started to share my experiences after decades of being silent, I saw how it impacted people and empowered them and validated them and their own experiences. And they would come and ask me a lot of questions. And so based on that, I started to offer myself to help people process their spiritual experiences or develop their spiritual nature, to help them connect with their higher self and be more authentic in their life. A lot of people think they've never had a spiritual experience, and I help them realize some of the things that they've experienced were indeed spiritual. My own daughter is a newborn ICU nurse, taking care of the very sickest, most preterm infants. And after she read my book, she said, "Dad, I now realize that I've had a lot of spiritual experiences that I didn't realize were spiritual before." So that's what I try to do for other people.
Yes, that's right. I've also had people say that now things make sense. There's an owner of a large company in the Denver area who his products go nationwide, and he read my book and mentioned to my daughter that now he realizes that he has had spiritual experiences too, and he thought he was grateful for that. It takes people actually getting out there. We're kind of like the pioneers that are opening up the field of this phenomena. So I am grateful to be a part of it, and I'm sure you are too.
I am grateful to be part of it. You know, I get messages sometimes. Sometimes I see the messenger, sometimes I don't. But on this one occasion, a messenger came to me and said, "Every experience is to enable you to help someone else." And I said, no, wait a minute. I thought experiences were for personal growth. And my messenger said, "The primary purpose of every experience is to enable you to help someone else. You get the secondary benefit of personal growth." And it totally changed my perspective about why we have hard experiences, difficult things. It's to give us empathy. It's to enable us to be able to help somebody else along the path. We're all here to help one another. And sometimes we want to make it so complicated, but it's not. It's very simple. We're here to love each other and to help each other.
Yes, this is true. And I know I had, in my near-death experience, they showed me that I had contracts with certain people to, like my daughter, I was supposed to be her mother. She chose me to be her mother, and I was supposed to be there for my son. Because I stayed for my son, because I knew something was going to happen to him in the future. And if I wasn't there, then he would go down a darker pathway. When that did present itself, was one sentence that I said that changed his entire life. And I could see a light go on over his head at that time. So yes, we're here working together with each other to learn and grow, all of us. So fantastic. And you had an experience with a motorcycle accident that you were treating a gentleman with a motorcycle accident, and you just had a feeling, the inner knowing that you needed to take a head x-ray?
Yes, he had a relatively minor motorcycle accident. He didn't appear to be injured. He had on a helmet, and his protective gear seemed to be fine, but the paramedics kind of drug him against his wishes to the hospital, and he just wanted to get up and go home. And he almost prevailed upon me to let him get up and go. There's some very well established, published criteria, accepted, scientifically assessed criteria to know when to image somebody's head or neck in such an accident. He did not meet any of the criteria that required him to have any imaging studies done. And I was about to let him get up and leave. And I, I just had this feeling, this knowing, this understanding of some kind. And I told him, I said, I think we should scan your head. I said, you don't meet the criteria to require a head scan. I don't have a scientific or medical reason to do this, but I think we should do it. And he joked with me about it. He kind of laughed and said, okay, doc, go ahead and order the unnecessary test, which I did. Normally, I would get the results of a CT scan like that back in 30 or 45 minutes or so via the computer. On this occasion, about 15 minutes after he went to the scanner, the radiologist called me urgently on my phone and told me that the guy had an epidural hematoma, a bleed inside of his skull that was accumulating so rapidly they could see swirls in the blood. And when I went back to see the patient, he was starting to get sleepy. Because I worked in a level 1 trauma center, I simply made a phone call to the neurosurgeon, and shortly after that, he was in the OR getting this collection of blood drained from his head, and he probably has no ill effect from it at all. But if I'd have let him get up and go home, he almost certainly would have died that night.
And that was
So,
because of an inner knowing.
I like to think that maybe his higher self was communicating with my higher self and saying, hey, something's happening here. You need to do something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm so grateful that you have that ability to help so many people, and you're still helping them now because you've retired from work, physically working in the ER, et cetera. You're now doing spiritual work, more or less, right?
Right. I don't see people in the ER anymore. And I was talking with a friend of mine once about the work I am doing now, and he looked at me and said, I think you're a healer. And I said, oh, no, I'm not a healer. There's only one healer, I said. And, I grew up in a Christian tradition, and that's how I felt. And he said, I disagree. I think you're a healer, and I think you should go ask for permission to use the word, which was an unusual thing to say. I thought, isn't that an interesting thing to say? So I came home, I changed my clothes, and I went out for a run because I get good downloads when I'm running. And I asked, I said, is it okay to call myself a healer? And Christ came to me and he chuckled and he said, of course, I made you a healer. And those were the only words he said, but I got this download and I understood, oh, he's not diminished by my successes. He's not insecure. If I'm a really good healer, it doesn't make him less. And I got all this understanding in an instant as he said those few words. And I came home that day after that run and I put healer on my business card and on my website.
Yeah, it's even in the Bible that he's giving people gifts, healing being one. So yeah.
I just posted a blog post about that very thing a couple days ago, borrowing from the Apostle Paul when he said, everyone has a gift. We all have gifts, he said. And, we need to honor that. And we need to not only honor our own gifts, but we need to honor the gifts that other people have that are different from our own.
That's right. That's right. So can you tell the audience about your books? You've got Not Yet, and you also have a novel called Who Buried Achilles, right?
Yes. Not Yet is a memoir. It's about my spiritual experiences, mostly in the emergency department, but also outside the emergency department. It's a short, easy read. I wrote it that way intentionally because I didn't want it to be an intimidating book.
Fabulous, fabulous.
The novel is a whole different story. I wrote that a couple of years earlier. I was working for about 5 weeks in Europe at the time, and the whole novel's set in Europe. And all the places that are described, the hotels, the restaurants, everything that the main character goes to, they're all places I stayed and ate. So that's where all the detail comes from. And it's about a really broken soul who grows up in an abusive home, and he frankly hates his father and the whole world. And then something happens in his life where after 30 years, he has to encounter his father, whom he hasn't seen in 30 years. And his father starts saying some things that completely change the character's whole path in life and send him looking for a spiritual understanding of what's going on. It's really a redemption story. I also have a series of 6 children's books. I don't ship them internationally, people who want children's books can get them on my website. I ship domestically. And my 3-year-old granddaughter one day riding in the car, she said, "Papa, tell me a story." And I was in the car, so I had to make it up. So I made up a story about Muck the Duck, and he learned something about bullying. And she liked it so much, she was still telling it 3 days later. My wife said, "Jeff, you have to write that down." So I wrote it down, and then I found an illustrator, and it was so much fun. After we finished Muck the Duck, we did 5 more.
Fantastic. And where can you get those? Can you get them through on Amazon, Barnes and Noble?
Don't
website?
get, not yet. And Who Buried Achilles you can get on Amazon or my website. Don't get the children's books off Amazon. I have to make the price much higher to cover their fees. If you want the children's books, order them off my website, jeffo'driscoll.com.
Yeah, that's why I was asking. Okay.
Yeah.
And if people want to get a hold of you, they need to go to your website as well. Yes.
And if you can't remember how to spell my name, just go to helpingsoulsheal.com.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. Well, fantastic. I'm so grateful that you were here today. And is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience first?
Yeah, let me share one last thing.
Yeah.
I was getting ready to speak to a group a few years ago, a sizable group, and I was really seeking to understand the message. What is it I'm to share? And it came very clearly, very directly. Tell them they're enough. Tell them they're divine. Tell them they're loved. It's such a powerful message. It's so needed in our world today. And so I share it frequently. You are divine, you are loved, you are enough. Remember those things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's through your kindness of sharing your story and other accounts that through the ER and through other doctors that are in this arena of this field of talk that bring validity to other people's experiences like mine too. So I'm very grateful to you for that. So I will put all your information below the video so everybody can find you. And for those who might have missed it, like I said, I'll put all the information below. So in closing, I would ask, I would like to wake up each day. I would like to thank the audience and wake up each day with a sense of wonder on where you will be guided, what you will be shown, and who will be placed in your pathway for you to learn from, because life is the biggest adventure you'll ever have. And like Jeff says, you are enough, and love is the only thing that matters, is what I got. So don't forget to subscribe below, and goodbye, everybody. Have a wonderful day.